Hello, checking in with. Ooh, I'm up to chapter 11. I'm about 20 minutes away from the end of Superior, the rise of the what is it? The return of race science by Angela Sani, I think. Um, where we've definitely been diving in to the science side of things, which, at a certain point does become a bit of a blur. It's a bit of an onslaught, but it's definitely one of these things where, ah, there's all the pseudoscience hacks out there who are just trying. Then there are got people who are just biological determinists who are determined, who are convinced that at some point genes are going to show significant differences in types across the world. They can't use race anymore because race has been discredited as a descriptor, but basically want to resurrect race as a scientific thing and seem to be convinced that any day now the science will bear it out, but it hasn't, and it continues not to, and it just doesn't seem to be there. At least that's from the actual kind of more mainstream respected scientists that Sani is talking to. Then we go into the whole thing of statistics, um, use of statistics in science by scientists who maybe don't have the greatest training in statistics. I know from like Ja and others, statistics is the most feared class to be taken by a lot of people in, even in kind of the soft sciences. And it just seems to be one of these areas where um, they're sifting, scientists are like just basically sifting data, factoring things out, um, and until they get a different, they see it, they get a difference, whether it's actually there or not, or they do something where I think it was they're looking at the severity of asthma in black people, where it's basically to get the results, they factored out what if black people didn't have severe asthma? Now let's look at the results. It's one of these things of how do you look at it? It's the whole thing of raw data isn't in itself particularly useful. It gives the example of the death rate in Alaska is far lower than the death rate in Florida. Thus, Florida is a far more deadly place to live. Except that's the raw data. Except what it doesn't take into account is that there's a huge retirement population in Florida. A good hunk of the population is above 65, whereas in Alaska, a place where a lot of people go to work and then, maybe retire to places like Florida, there's a very relatively small senior population. So thus, a lot of people are dying of natural causes. A lot more people are dying in Florida because they're a lot older on the mean. If you factor that in to the death rates, suddenly, if you account for that in the death rates, suddenly both Florida and Alaska are equally as deadly, or equally as benign. Just they both have about the same death rate. So, and that's the case when you're looking at stuff and looking at for other factors, and people continue to look for racial factors. Maybe a part of that is, especially in the States, that racial, are you black, are you white, gets collected as data. If maybe hair color had been collected by data, you could sift it through to say, blonde people are far more likely to get lung cancer than, people with dark hair, or something, something nonsensical like that. But it does not, because we have these kind of have these hardwired assumptions, we have a tendency to accept it with stuff like this. There's the whole thing of, black Americans are far more prone to hypertension. So this must have something to do with them being black. Except these black Americans who primarily come from a certain part of Africa. In Africa, these people, the population, don't have high hypertension rates. So what's the difference? There was a theory put forward that it was apparently endorsed by Oprah and Dr. Oz, her great scientist, that it was when people were enslaved and taken across on the horrible fucking crossing, that the people who died were people who couldn't retain salt as well. And it was a rapid evolutionary thing. Now, biologists looked at that and go, that does not happen over that kind of a short period of time. That's not possible. And indeed, what they then looked at was, oh, you know what? If you, instead of looking at the race of somebody, if you look at their if you look at their economic status is actually a far better predictor of whether someone's got hypertension or not, because if you're richer, you've got a better diet, you have maybe less stress, things like that, that are in, and much less the whole thing of the stress of being a black person in America, and how that the stress of that could apparently contribute to hypertension. I don't know. So, yes, it's interesting how just things get slipped into science. Again, it's like, science is performed by human beings, and as much as we try and put double blinds on things and stuff like that, this is scientists pushing at data to try and find something, and pushing and finding their own assumptions reflected back at them. So, yeah, more interesting stuff from Superior. All right, I will leave it there. More videos later.